Hi everyone, welcome back to Ruth's Home Truths. Thanks for joining us on the podcast or on YouTube, wherever you're watching this. Today I have with us the beautiful Anna, who is based in, is it Sydney? You're in Sydney?
Yeah.
Anna's based in Sydney, and Anna is going to talk to us a little bit today about dating in the Catholic scene. So Anna is 33. And she's got a great job. And Anna, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
I do have a great job. I'm glad you put it that way. No, so I used to be a journalist full time, and then I basically became a full time media advisor. So I'm working now at Campion College, which is a Catholic liberal arts college in Sydney. It's also my alma mater. So I graduated from there in 2012 with a liberal arts degree, and very happy 3 years I spent there. And so I went out into the world intending to become a journalist, which I did. And I, after about 6 or 7 years of that, kind of moved over into the media advisory sphere, and I ended up kind of doing full circle, coming all the way back to Campion again, which is great because my former lecturers are now my colleagues, which is awesome. And so lunchtimes are just so much fun. But on top of that, I also still do some freelancing journalism, and these days I'm doing more op-eds than reporting.
Yeah.
Although I still do a little bit of that as well.
Wow. So, and what are some of the main topics that you usually talk about?
Well, the thing I'm mostly known for is I wrote an article for the Catholic Weekly 1 year ago, basically about how dire the Catholic dating scene really is. But the point of the article, that was more the context. The point of the article really was commenting on a trend, or potentially a trend, that I'd noticed of good Catholic girls basically abandoning their faith or abandoning their beliefs in order to pursue relationships, which I found very disturbing, particularly when I knew some of these girls personally, and they weren't sort of, your cultural Catholics who don't even, go to church on Sundays, but they actually really knew their faith, and I thought, had a good relationship with God. And I mean, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I'm not sure. I'm not really commenting on that, but it was more surprising that they would actually sort of turn their backs on their faith. Particularly, some of them were actually quite involved in their parish communities, and just seemed a bit strange. And basically, what I drew from that, partly just from observation and partly from intuition, was that there's this. I think there's a whole new kind of level of desperation that I'm seeing amongst girls. Women are getting married later and later. The culture is becoming more and more degenerate, and I think that women are getting more and more desperate as a result, and men as well. But I'm noticing more of women to find relationships, basically.
Yeah, wow.
To get married and settle down.
So, what was that like for you? Like watching these women do this?
Oh, it was really heartbreaking, actually. I mean, the first time you hear something like that, it's like, oh my goodness, like so and so did what? And then you think, gosh, that's crazy. Have to, keep them in my prayers. Hope they, hope she comes back, I guess, so things turn out well. But then you hear it again, and then you hear it again, and it's kind of like, what is going on here? Like, what is happening? This is not normal. Like, it's not normal to turn your back on your beliefs or do. I mean, particularly if you're Catholic, there are some very strict rules that apply. So one of the things, for example, is if you're Catholic, you're actually not supposed to get married outside of a Catholic church, because it's the sort of, the environment, I guess, kind of linked to what we believe, is a sacrament, marriage. And so there are some pretty strict rules around that, considering its sacred nature. And so if you can get married outside a Catholic church, but you have to get permission and stuff. And so there are kind of specific things like that. And so but I mean, I think it wasn't just like breaking rules. It was like leaving the church entirely in order to pursue relationships. So it's kind of like, I guess it's almost equivalent to, I mean, this isn't the first time I've heard of this, but all these girls were quite young, which was what was surprising to me. So they were all in their 20s or 30s.
Okay.
I mean, I've heard of other stories in the past of women, who dating guys, and then, after a while they ask them to, like, move in with them to sort of, how a lot of these guys will say, oh, we don't have to sleep together, it's fine. And they'll make it seem like it's fine, but then down the track, but they don't really believe that, or they don't really mean that, because I think they think that eventually he'll be able to get her over the line. And then they'll be like, oh, well, I'll marry you, but first of all, I want us to live together, and so you have to move in, and and I think a lot of men use these tactics and often kind of emotionally blackmail women into basically kind of giving them what they want, and I think that, and I and find that those aren't particularly virtuous men, perhaps you could say, but I guess what's surprising to me is that seeing women actually kind of really getting into this and almost doing anything just because they're so scared of losing this relationship, or so scared of being like, it's like the fear of being alone seems to be trumping everything. And I'm not saying that hasn't been the case. I think it has been the case, but it just does seem to be more widespread and worse these days, in my opinion. So that was what my article was about. I got a very strong response to the article. I guess you could say it went viral. I think it got picked up by about half a dozen other publications. I sent it to one or two, but it got picked up by a bunch of others. I just became inundated in correspondence for months, actually. In fact, the editor of the Catholic Weekly called me one time to say, like, I mean this in the nicest way possible, but like, if I never hear your name again, it will be too soon.
Wow.
He was just like, he was getting inundated in phone calls and letters and stuff. It was really funny. And the reason being, I think that I think a lot of people took issue with the way that I characterized, because I basically characterized what my experience of the dating scene is, and not just my experience, but pretty much every other Catholic woman I've spoken to, in a pretty no nonsense, unapologetic way. And I think a lot of people took offense at that or issue with it. So it kind of ended up, so in some ways that was not a great thing, because the overall message of the article actually got a bit obscured. And I actually found, people who were pretty angry at me told me later on that when they actually heard me speak about it, either like at a podcast, or I did actually get invited to speak publicly about it not long after the article came out. And I was explaining my concerns about, women, and it's almost like they didn't realize that was the point of the article until they heard me talk about it. And I think that that's probably just because, if something is an emotional trigger for you, it can be like something to kind of get blinders on, and you kind of can maybe like miss things. And so that seemed to happen. That seemed to happen with quite a few people. I mean, a lot of people got the point. Plenty of people wrote to me and said, I totally agree with you. Thank you for saying this.
And how would you describe what the point was in a nutshell?
Oh, well, just that. Oh, basically, don't sell yourself for a relationship, I suppose. That's how someone said that to me, actually, and I was like, that's a good summary. So yeah.
And Anna, have you ever been tempted yourself to sell out?
I actually haven't. But that's probably less to do with me being like a supremely virtuous person, and more to do with the fact that I don't find that I meet men very often who I really connect with. It's very, very rare for me to meet a guy I actually connect with enough to, develop feelings for, or to even consider a relationship. It's probably like once every 2 or 3 years or something. So it is quite rare.
Yeah. Well, I actually have a lot of girls say that to me, that they're just not meeting anyone. Not that they're not meeting anyone, but they're not meeting anyone that they have any kind of connection with, or that would ever be interested.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
And this is something, so many reasons. I mean, to be honest, I don't think that's necessarily any different to how it's always been. What I think has changed is just our culture. That's really what's changed. Back in the day, everybody went to church. I mean, whether you were really into your faith or not, like, it was a normal thing to go to church. And even if you didn't strictly go to church, you at least had this, like, culturally speaking, everyone more or less had the same values. Whereas now everything is so wildly divisive, and everyone is just so split on either side of all these spectrums. So first of all, it's harder to find people that you agree with, and I think it's very difficult to connect with people who, whose fundamental beliefs are so different to your own. But the other thing is, because there's been such a breakdown in Christian practice, the community has just been broken, I think. And I think that's one of the real tragedies of the 20th and 21st centuries. Community life. I mean, community is still important. Human beings need community. I think that what's changed is, as moral norms have broken down, as people have become, as atheism has grown in popularity and become more widespread and more mainstream, basically, as less and less people actually adhere to Christian values and to Christian teaching, less people go to church, obviously. So there's less people at the, at church. So the community life is necessarily going to be affected. But also, just the average person's morals are so wildly different to, I suppose, a practicing Christian's. It's very difficult to actually. You're already basically on a different playing field with most men of your age, and because sexual vices are, men are more prone to them. And basically, I mean, gosh, there's all kinds of, like, as Russell Brand put, like, icebergs of filth available at your fingertips, the like of which we've never seen before. Like, I'm thinking specifically of pornography and access to, prostitutes, and just basically, all those kind of moral vices that have kind of always been around, but never with this ease of access, and never so proliferant. All these things are affecting. I think all these things are affecting all of society, but particularly young men. And I think it's really sad to think that I think the average young man you come across in the street probably watches pornography, if not addicted to it, is addicted to it. So that's going to impede a man's own maturity and his own sexual development and preferences. And even if you don't even have to go that far, I mean, the average person believes that you should sleep with your partner before marriage. Like, as a Catholic, I don't agree with that. So that's one problem. Like, trying to find a man who's actually willing to save sex for marriage, that's one problem. And but then even seeing things the same way. So basically, I guess what I'm saying, probably with way too many words, is when people are more or less on the same playing field, it was just easier to meet people with whom you agreed, and therefore easier to meet people whom you share a connection with. And that's just not the case anymore. So kind of makes sense. Like, we really should have seen this coming, I think, from a long time ago, that as all these, moral and social norms kind of broke down, this was going to affect relationships. Like, it has to have.
Totally.
And I think women like me are just, unfortunately, living in the time in which we are kind of reaping what has been sowed in previous generations.
Yeah. Amen. Preach it. I agree with you.
It's not really something I want to preach about. It's so depressing.
It's so true. Yeah, I actually talk about that in my book. The idea that, because all these girls are saying, well, what is wrong with me? Why can't I get a boyfriend? Like, I feel like I've, got a pretty good package on offer here. Like, I'm a nice person, like, I get out there, but yeah, it's.
And that's, I just want to point out, that's not to say that exactly, and that's not to say that there aren't lots of good, decent Christian men who are also struggling to find women. I mean, I read something. I was looking up some research on this, just on church numbers, and I found something online which was interesting, and just kind of mentioned the idea that, under normal circumstances, most people have to interact with an enormous swathe of people in order to actually even find, like, the one person they might, not necessarily the one person they might marry, but even just one of the very few people they might connect with. And so that's just under normal circumstances. Now, that when that's severely limited, and you think that the pool of practicing Christians has become so small, then the people you interact with less. That doesn't necessarily change the fact that you still have to maybe interact on average with X number of people in order to actually meet those people you can form a connection with. So that's another difficulty. So I think that's why, and it feels like, oh, but it's been so long, and because it has been so long, because normally I don't think it would have taken this long, but you were normally interacting with more people who just generally agreed with you on things.
Yeah. And so do you feel like it's an issue with quantity or quality in terms of, there's no guys around?
Probably both, to be honest. Quantity, I mean, I've kind of already gone into that. Quality, in the sense, I don't want people to get upset. When I say quality, I think what I mean really is there's just such a small proportion of men who are actually truly willing to be virtuous. I think that's really what's lacking in most men. And I'm not saying that most women are like, I just want a virtuous man, because I think all of us really do want virtuous men, but maybe that's not necessarily the most attractive thing, because you can't just have someone who's virtuous and nothing else, because you're not going to get anywhere like that. And so I think the real problem is, for whatever reason, and I suspect there are many, because, and I think it has to do with the fact that men do just struggle more with adhering to Christian values than women, because because the opportunity for sin, particularly for sin that men are more, prone to, is just so rife, that you tend to get less men who, I guess, for lack of a better word, are kind of socially normal or able, than women. And so I think the real problem is that women kind of are struggling to meet men they can actually form a connection with, because they can't actually meet men who are on the sort of same social plane as often as, and even if you do meet men who you can talk to, there's no guarantee you're going to have an attraction to each other. So, but because those men are so rare, that's what makes, I think that's kind of like, it feels like looking for a unicorn, like a man.
Yes.
Basically, I think what it comes down to is, I think a lot of Christian women who are kind of in the world but not of the world, who are very sociable, know how to have a conversation, are interested in things outside of their faith, like music and friends and films and books and whatever. I think the problem is that women are trying to find men who both share their beliefs and also they can connect with. And that is just, that combination is so hard to find. And I think that's the case in the Catholic Church as well as in the Protestant churches as well.
Wow. And what's been
I've thought a lot about this, as you can tell.
Yeah, I can tell. What's been your personal experience, if you don't mind talking about it, in terms of dating in the Catholic world? You're 33. Have you had a lot of boyfriends or any boyfriends, or are you quite proactive in dating?
I've been on a lot of dates.
Yeah.
But I would say I've only had one friend, or I mean, if you count, like, I don't really count when I was a teenager, because that wasn't really meaningful. But one of the criticisms that I got initially, in like the comment, I learned not to read the comments section of any of where my articles are published, because it was just dire for my self-esteem. Because people just say the worst things on when they have the protection of the computer screen in front of them. But one of the criticisms that really bothered me at first was people like, oh, this girl's just like woken up at 30 and realized she's single and she's about to like lose her fertility and she just needs to like get a man. And that's just not true. And I think it's easy to sort of brush people like me aside, saying, oh, well, she's frittered her life away doing this, that, and the other, and now she's suddenly desperate. It's not true. I've been looking for a husband, or at least for a boyfriend that would turn into a husband, probably from about age 17. Like, I've been very actively interested. Like, I was crying to God in my sleep, like, God, I just want a boyfriend. Like, why can't you let me meet someone? When I was 17, I honestly didn't care about career or whatever. Like, I figured I could just have both. I could, do whatever it is I wanted to do, which is writing, which is what I'm doing, and then have a relationship. And I didn't think it was going to be such an issue. And as just time has gone on and on and on, and the latter has just proved harder and harder to find. It's been a real shock, actually. Just like, it's not like I've just started looking. I've been interested forever. Interested, really since I was a little kid. I was always like, my wedding day, and it was always something I was excited about. But I guess my experience in a nutshell is I meet plenty of guys who are lovely, but they're just not for me. Like, we're just not really right for each other. And most of the time, these things don't go beyond like 1 or 2 days. When I was in my early to mid 20s, I was dating someone who I was convinced I was going to marry. And he was a few years younger than me, and basically had this kind of moment of, oh, I'm not ready for a serious relationship right now. And so we basically put an end to it. And that took a really long time for me to get over, because it wasn't like a relationship that kind of fizzled out and died. It was like at the height of it, so everything was exciting and wonderful and magical, and I was like in love for the first time. And it kind of ended, like cut off right at the peak. So it took a really long time to recover from that.
Yeah.
And that probably took me out of the dating scene probably about 4 years, to be honest, just because I learned that when I love someone, I really, really love them, and it goes very deep. And even just getting over like the resentment that naturally comes with that. I think these are all things that, unfortunately, they're all roadblocks, at least in my experience. And since then, I've only probably met 3 guys that I even am remotely attracted to. So, and each one of them just hasn't worked out. Like, it's been the right time for me, but not for them, or, this one issue after another. Basically, I haven't had like a really long relationship probably ever. And while I have been on like you know, I'm generally pretty open to going on dates. And oh gosh, certainly after my article came out, I had a lot of people contact me. I had to kind of like sift them between genuine people and probably bots operating out of Africa. There were some very weird messages that I got online. But I've been on a lot of dates, but I'm almost like a little bit over going on dates because it's just kind of exhausting after a while, meeting person after person after person with whom you share almost nothing in common and who you wouldn't even want to talk to at a party, let alone marry. So yeah, it can be demoralizing.
Yeah, I remember those feelings too. And when you just feel like, well, you can't give up an opportunity. You never know. And it's so exhausting.
Like exactly. And well, I've become a little bit more circumspect about it because all your girlfriends are always like, just go on a date, it's not gonna hurt, you know. And I used to say that, well, if a guy, I know it's really hard for men to ask women on dates, so if they've asked me on a date, I will say yes, just because, you know, they probably deserve, you know, to at least have me take that seriously, because I know that's not fun or easy, and I don't like to reject people for the sake of rejecting them or anything like that. But I think also now, I mean, I know a lot of people are not going to agree with this, but I'm pretty certain now, I'm 33. So I know myself well enough, and I've been on enough dates and I've met enough people to know I can pretty much tell within a single conversation if there's even a snowflake's hope of hell of this going anywhere. Yeah. And so if I genuinely believe that it's not going to go anywhere, there's actually no chance of it going anywhere, I think it's kinder actually to be honest and upfront with the guy. And that doesn't mean being mean or dismissive, but I don't want to waste his time because there's probably some other person out there for him, and there's no point me going on dates with him when I know full well it's not going to go anywhere. And so there are definitely dates in the past that I wish in hindsight I hadn't gone on, because I think that it actually ended up being more disappointing for the guy after me saying no after a date. So there's that as well.
Oh, it's so exhausting dating.
Sorry, this is not very happy.
No,
this is very happy reminiscences from me.
Look, I think that, you know, girls need to know that their experience is not an isolated experience. It's quite
that's definitely
a bit of an epidemic at the moment, isn't it?
And another thing worth mentioning is, look, I've been very fortunate in that I mean, I have been asked out on quite a few dates. I know not all women get that same experience. A lot of women feel like they never get asked. I mean, actually, one of my old housemates, she's married now, but she was just like, no one will ask me out. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I can't ask them out. So what am I? And the poor thing, like, I think she was something like 2 or 3 years. She got asked out like once or twice, and the second time I think by the man who's now her husband. And even then, often she had to like prod the friend of the you know, of the guy and be like, you can tell him I'm interested. Like, it was just a lot of guys I think are also just too scared to ask girls out. I think they just let the nerves get the better of them, or they just don't kind of make the effort to go out and actually just not even ask out, even just to sort of have a conversation. I mean, some men do for sure, but a lot of them just prefer to just stay in their little huddle of men outside of church every Sunday and not talk to girls.
Isn't it? It's so gross when guys do that.
It's really not. It's, especially when you think that women are primarily attracted to confidence, probably above any other virtue, of any other quality. So even just like actually getting out of your comfort zone, asking a girl is already going to put you in better standing with them generally, even if it doesn't go anywhere.
I totally agree. Do you feel like in the Catholic Church in general, or in your local Catholic church, there is an emphasis on marriage, and is there an encouragement for men to be pursuing women? Like, is that something that's taught and encouraged, or is it just not even discussed, you know?
Well, I think it depends on where you go, to be honest. And I probably should point, I'm not trying to make this all sound like it's all the fault of men, because I think that a lot of men are in the exact same boat as women like me.
But is that
and
really
I think
true?
that is just down to,
like, because if that is true,
I had
there's so many girls.
Wouldn't believe how many. I know. You wouldn't. Okay, the facts are this. What I was going to say was, you wouldn't believe how many men I got emails from or messages from saying, I'm this age, blah blah blah. You know, I've really struggled to meet, and I've met them in person, and there's nothing wrong with them. They just have been really unlucky, and it's actually really hard, because some of these are like really genuinely lovely young men, and it's like, I really feel for you. I'm not the person for you, but I really wish I could find someone for you. And I think that it is just difficult to meet the right person that you connect with. And even if it almost doesn't even matter necessarily, you know, whether you meet 100 new people each week. I mean, because sometimes it's that needle in the haystack that you're looking for most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was going to say was, the fact is this: there are less young men than there are any other demographic in the church. That is very demonstrably true in pretty much every every research study that's taken place over the last few decades. But if you've got a pair of eyes, you can pretty much tell. I think in Sydney, the last church life survey they found that women outnumbered men almost 2 to 1 in Sydney. That was across all denominations. And I think the average parishioner across those parishes was a woman in her 50s. So when a woman in her 50s is the average parishioner, then you know things are kind of going to be dire for young women trying to find men. So I think it's tough for both sexes, but I do think that just purely on the evidence, it's harder for women. And I think that we all understand why that is. Like I said, I think it is just harder for men to kind of, I guess, escape the wiles of the world, to put it one way. But also, I think women are more emotional, and so perhaps I think women might, or maybe more in touch with their emotions generally than men. And there is definitely that emotional element when it comes to religious faith. And I think that that can be a barrier for a lot of men who think that they might be seen as being too girly or feminized by having something like a belief in something that you can't see or touch or feel. And so the fact that I think religious observance and practice comes more naturally to women is also something that makes it a bit tougher for us. I can't even remember what your question was originally.
Yeah, me neither.
What was your question? All right, I got lost in my own train of thought there.
So your friends, your female friends in the Catholic Church who have got married.
Yes.
You know, it's obviously happening for some girls and not for others.
Look, it happens.
What is that about?
When you consider that this used to happen for everybody,
yeah,
and hardly anyone got left out except for like, you know, the maybe people who were like felt like they were called to something else. I mean, when this was happening for like, let's say, I don't know, 95% of men and women, and now it's happening probably for something like 60%. I mean, or even 70%. Like, that's a massive drop.
Yeah,
that's a huge drop. It doesn't seem like much on paper, but in reality, that's huge.
That's huge.
And I'm not getting those numbers from anywhere. I pulled them out of my head. So don't quote me on that. But yeah, I do think that's why it is a lot tougher.
Yeah, that's really.
For the women that did, for the friends of mine who have gotten married, I just think that they were just very blessed, and for whatever reason, God chose for them to meet the right person at the right time. And it's interesting because a lot of these guys who are married, who are married to my friends are awesome guys, and I think they're fantastic. And it's kind of interesting to be like, well, to recognize that this is a really marriageable young man right here. But it doesn't mean I'm attracted to him. And that's a good thing, because obviously he wasn't meant for me. But that's the experience that you kind of come across again and again. And I think some women, I don't want to say get lucky, because I think that it is down to God's will. But I have to say it can get very tiresome to see women who are kind of like, it's particularly in the Catholic circle, there's a lot of, I'm not sure if I'm called to the religious life or if I'm called to marriage, because we do think of this as what you do in life as being a vocation, like a calling from God. Like, God actually has an intention for you as to how you'll serve him in life, whether it's through marriage or through a religious vocation, which are obviously meant to be obviously a lot more rare than marriages, which are obviously the norm. But it can be a bit frustrating to hear your friends say things like, oh, they're not sure, they're still discerning what God's will is for them, and then like next thing they're engaged, and it's like, really, I've been asking for this for so long. I've never had any doubt that I'm to her. Like, why? But yeah, of course that's not the right way of saying it, but it can get tempting to see it that way, and to feel like shortchanged.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good word, shortchanged. I know I felt like that a lot in my past, and I know a lot of girls have felt like that too. So it's not an isolated experience, that's for sure.
Yeah, it can. I mean, on a more serious note, for a second, it actually can be kind of painful, to be honest. Even just going to mass on a Sunday, and to be to feel as if you're surrounded by young, happy couples. It's incredibly isolating, and it's actually kind of depressing. And I think that, and that was actually one of the reasons I wrote the article, last year as well, was just because I don't think that pain is being sufficiently acknowledged. And actually, I remember your question earlier, actually. This does get talked about for sure in the Catholic circles I'm amongst, but I don't think nearly enough. And I don't think nearly enough from the pulpit. Some churches are better than others, but I do think that I wish that there was more. I wish there was more discussion of marriage, and basically, what young men and women should and shouldn't be doing from the pulpit. I would like to see that. I think a lot of people would. And also, another thing that I really wish we could get past is this idea. I mean, we understand why we want to get married, especially as women, because there's an emotional yearning for that. But I really do hate this cultural sense that getting married is some sort of achievement that you've can tick off in life, and that and the way we talk about it as if it's like, oh, she escaped, like it's like we're all in prison, and it's like she's like one of the lucky ones, she managed to get out. But that's not the way we should look at it, and we shouldn't treat people who get married as if they've won some sort of achievement. And I see this even in people who have gotten engaged, and there is a certain, whether they intend it or not, bit of a superciliousness, I think, about the fact that they've got a ring on their finger.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame. Because it basically makes an already hard situation harder, and you can't do anything about it. That's the thing. You just can't do anything about it, practically. You can pray, you put yourself out there, but that's about all you can do.
So let me think.
Again, I'm sorry if this is a bit of a downer.
No, look, this is just the reality, isn't it? This is what we want to hear. It's what it's like. And we've all been there. So, I mean, you talk about feeling...
Some longer than others.
Some longer than others. Oh, man. Yeah, well, I got married when I was 34. So, similar to you, I had a few.
Okay, I got a year left.
I know, I always used to think like that, of thinking like, oh, well, that person's so, such and such age, so it's still got so many years. And then once that...
It's really hard not to think like that.
I'll think of someone else. I'm like, who else is there? I need some role models out there.
Well, I mean, this is something I'm battling against every day. I mean, I have this idea of 35 in my head. I'm like, I can't get to 35 and not be married. Like, please, God, no. It's not necessarily anything terrible or even demonstrably different about 35 compared to 33. Apart from the fact that, I'm aware that my fertility is definitely winding down, which, again, something I can't do anything about. But I've been working with my psychologist for the last few years on, she does something that's called acceptance commitment therapy, which I very highly recommend to anyone, whether you're dealing with this kind of situation or just generally anxiety or stress or depression. And so what we've been really working on is just trying to accept. It's like the Alcoholics Anonymous prayer, the accept the things I can't change. And yeah, so it's essentially that. You pray for the things that you want, but you can't keep fighting against God. You can't keep fighting against what He's clearly willed for you in your life. I mean, if you really do believe that God has a specific will for you, and I think as Christians we all do, or at least we all should, if you really believe that, then there has to be at some stage, I think you are either in a state of fighting against God's will, or you're in a state of accepting it. And for a long time, because probably I'm naturally a little bit more antagonistic than most people, I've been in the stage of fighting, and so I've been trying to work my way into acceptance, which is really tough, because there's this fear that if you accept God's will, He's gonna zoom in and screw everything up. It's like, she's given me permission, I can now destroy her life. Which is so ridiculous, but I think it's a fear that I think a lot of women actually secretly have.
Yeah.
And it's something I've had to fight against for sure. So it's important to know that I have been working my way towards acceptance, and I've more or less got there now, which is purely grace from God. I don't think I've done that myself. It's just been about trying to get to a point where I can actually accept God's will and work with Him rather than work against Him. But there is definitely a great deal of peace that comes with accepting things as they are and not trying to control the situation all the time, which for someone like me, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the 4 temperaments, but I'm more of a choleric nature, so I have real control issues. Generally, I want to control everything in my life. Yeah. And so just letting go and accepting is probably the hardest thing for someone like me. I think it's hard for everybody because as human beings, this is just the way we're wired. But yeah, that's an important thing to think about. And if I can just sort of pitch, this for down the track, I actually am in the middle of writing a book, more or less along these lines, about how we can go about accepting God's will for us, and also let's like lead the most fulfilling lives that we can now. So keep an eye out for that sometime down the track.
Yay.
Not to steal your thunder, Ruth.
Oh no, please go for it. We need as much out there as possible. And so for you, like, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was single, there's definitely a feeling of like, well, it got to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm kind of sick of my career. It's all good, but I'm just killing time until I get married. Do you resonate with that?
Yeah. I know many women who have been there. I've tried actively to not get into that space. I mean, I'm a bit more of a doer than a beer in general, which is probably, I wish sometimes I could just settle and be for a few minutes, but I tend to fill my life with things to do. So not so much just for the sake of doing them, but I kind of, for a long time, I realized I was waiting for things I was waiting to get married in order to do certain things. I think I told myself, well, I can't, there's no point, doing this until I get married, or, once I'm settled down, I can focus on this. And at some point I realized, well, I might never get married. So if I don't start doing this now, then I might I possibly never will. So I basically kind of prioritized what was most important to me, what I wanted my life to look like and what I wanted it to be about. And I started focusing more on prioritizing those things. And I think that has probably saved me from getting into a rut of, I hate my life, I hate my job, when am I going to get married? That will fix everything. So I've been trying very hard to not get into that space by, either taking on more hobbies, but also taking my faith on a day-to-day basis a bit more seriously, investing more time in personal prayer. And I'm probably doing too much, to be honest. Like I'm learning, I work full time, but I'm also, I'm studying Latin, and I play the piano, I just picked up the guitar, and I'm also writing a book, and I could also I also had some issues just on a personal level. So my mum was actually quite ill for a few years, and she actually passed away the year before last. And my dad is not in the best of health either, so there's a lot of demands on my time, just generally anyway. But being busy and active certainly has helped make me feel like, there is more to my life than just my job, and that's it. My job and my faith. I like that. I think it's important to have a social life, and to also just do things that make you happy or that you're interested in doing.
So you're kind of doing your best you can to maintain meaning.
Yeah, that's basically it. And there's definitely going to be a chapter on this in my book as well. I think women particularly have this tendency of thinking, oh, when I get married, finish this sentence kind of thing. And I think that's really important to stop, to recognize that you're doing it, also to stop doing. And that might be something like maybe start saving and buy a house rather than waiting to get married to buy a house, if that's what you want to do. I do think that most, if not all, young single people would do well to live out of home, even for just 6 months or a year. I think that's a really important experience that would benefit a lot of people. I actually suggested this on my blog. I have a blog that I started after my article kind of went viral, and I couldn't believe the pushback I got from suggesting something that I thought was as innocuous as, oh, you should definitely try and live out of home. And the reason I said that was because, I didn't move out of home till quite late, but when I did, it was such a shock, how much I took for granted, but also, things like managing a budget, and also kind of managing full-time work with cooking, especially if you're cooking for more than one person, and and also trying to fit laundry when no one else is doing any of these things for you. You have to do everything for yourself. It really was a big learning curve. And I got some narky comment of saying like, oh, I can't believe you didn't learn all this at home. It's like, oh, you pay for all the bills, and you cook all the meals, and you do all the work, and you do all the laundry in your own house, do you? I don't think so. It's a very different experience when you're the one doing it for yourself. But yeah, that was a bit of a sidetrack.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear your perspective on these things, because I think all the girls are going through different journeys, And I guess for you, like when you do get married, What do you pick
I'm glad you said the word, Ruth.
when you get married? What do you picture your life to be like in the house and in the marriage? Because I mean, you're so busy now. Do you think
Well,
are you just going to stop everything and just be this ultimate wife? What are you going
well,
to do?
gotta be careful. I gotta be careful with my words here.
What do you think is going to
Okay,
happen?
so look, the way I envision it, if it does happen, which I very much hope it does, is I imagine I will keep working at the very least until I have kids.
Yeah.
I have, I think that where possible, it is really good for for women to be full-time mums with their children. My mum was a full-time mum at home with us, and I know that that was such a wonderful element about my childhood, having her around all the time. And so I take that very seriously. That would be my goal. Like if I could do it, I will. But it really just depends on where I live and who I get married to, and how we can manage that. But I think there are definitely some things that I will slide. Look, to be honest, I've shamefully neglected my blog this last year while I've been writing my book. But there are definitely some things that will have to give way. I mean, one thing that is worth mentioning, I know that I have no doubt that married life will be about 1,000 times smoother if I got married tomorrow than it would have been had I got married 10 years ago, because particularly through, doing a lot of work on myself with my psychologist particularly, but also just growing in various ways, and also, living and, helping care for sick parents. I've just changed and grown so unrecognizably. And one of my, for example, one of my worst faults is impatience. I'm just chronically impatient. It's the toughest thing for me to actually just take a breath and have patience with other people, because I'm kind of tend to be like I'll just do it myself. But I've had to force myself to not do that, particularly with my parents at different times. And so so my mum passed away from a long battle with early onset Alzheimer's, and it's really, really tough when your parent gets Alzheimer's or dementia just generally, I imagine, because you kind of want them to just sort of snap out of it, and you want things to sort of go back to normal as desperately, but you really can't, and there's nothing that you can do about that. And in fact, so often at the early stages, you'll find they'll tend to ask the same question again and again, not realizing they've already asked it. And you can get and it's very easy to just snap and be like, I've already asked that. But that's actually, they say, the worst thing to do with someone in that situation. You actually have to answer them as if they haven't asked it, maybe 4 or 5 times before, which is incredibly difficult to do. It's very counterintuitive, and it takes an enormous amount of patience. So, and it's funny, I've described some encounters to my psychologist, who sort of laughed and said, this is fantastic practice for being married. These are the sorts of things often that people encounter with their spouses or with their children. Like often you do have to really, really swallow a lot of your own pride, a lot of your own natural inclinations, and sacrifice yourself for the sake of the other, which is really what marriage is all about. So I feel it's not been very happy at times, but I still do feel blessed to have had that experience. So I think I would make a much better wife now than I would have when I was, thought I was in my, when I was, according to the world, in my prime, in like my mid-20s or my early 20s as opposed to my early 30s.
I guess, yeah, look, I have a toddler, and I can tell you right now, that's what it's like.
Oh yeah, I have a ton of nieces and nephews, so I have a little bit of a insight into what marriage is, what family life is like.
It's a bit of a shock, I think, sometimes. Well, it was for me. Yeah. I'm a high school teacher. I'm used to having these,
right.
intelligent, sarcastic conversations with people who can, tie their own shoes and wipe their own bottom. And now I'm like, what is this? This is so different.
These little people, they can't do anything for themselves.
I know, it's so different. Oh, but
yeah, I have to say, I do love my nieces and nephews. They're easily like the greatest joy in my life.
Yeah,
they're so cute. They're so funny.
Yeah, I guess we'll probably start wrapping up, but I've got to ask you something and get your thoughts on this. Like, because I find some varied responses from career women, particularly who get married later, And you've got to keep busy to have meaning in your life. There's no point sitting at home just complaining about being
Oh yeah, I
single.
wasn't trying to imply that I'm going to cease
No, no, no,
everything and just
no, no,
be
no,
there for
no, no.
whatever my
That's
husband
not
needs.
what I mean.
Obviously, there will be
Yeah,
elements of that, but yeah,
yeah. But
I'll still be me.
I think what I've observed is girls that get married quite young, as I have observed, they tend to like slide into marriage a little bit easier. This idea of like
Mm,
being a team and living together and serving each other and just like working together and collaborating and becoming one. Whereas I think when you're a bit older, it can be a bit jarring. Um, so, kind of with that in mind, what are your thoughts? I mean, particularly from a Catholic or even you want to say maybe a religious perspective, what are your thoughts on what is it about what is being a wife? Like, is it a role that we take on? Is it like an office? You move into the office of being a wife, or do you just be yourself? And what does that mean? So, yeah, role of
I think
being
it's a
wife.
bit of all. I think it's a bit of all of the above. Like I said before, from a Catholic perspective, we would take that quite seriously in the sense of it being a vocation. So
Yeah.
God has called me to be the wife of Mr. X. And so, I mean, I do take the sort of traditional Christian view much more than I would say kind of like a modern view of that. Your marriage is the most important. Your marriage and your family, if that is what God has called you to, is the most important thing in your life. It's much more important than any job, much more important than any career, and therefore it does deserve, a certain degree of attention that I suppose it kind of demands it as well, because you can't just walk away from your family the way you can walk away from the office at the end of the day. But I think that in an ideal world, it would be great if I think in an ideal world, men are primarily the breadwinners, and the wife takes care of, and I think in our heart of hearts, that's probably what most of us really deeply desire anyway. Now, I'm not saying that women can't or shouldn't work. Like I've said before, often both parents need to work. I think it's a shame that needs to be the case, but it will just be the case. And some women will, maybe not take to family life as easily as others. But I do think at the end of the day, your children and your husband need to be your first priority if you're a wife. And I think everything else has to come second. Now, to what degree or how you go about that, I think is purely up to the couple and the family. Everyone's different. Everyone's in a different situation. But that's certainly how I would see it.
And are you looking forward to that kind of lifestyle? Like, do you feel like, okay, I
Oh,
can
yeah.
give up the Latin, the
You kidding me?
piano?
I've been dreaming about this since I was 16. No, I mean, look, I really don't know what to expect, to be honest. But I know I'm always right, regardless of what I do in life. That will always be. I mean, what I would really love is to not have to work for a living and just be able to write, in amidst, mothering and wifely duties. That would be my ideal life. And also I'm just such an active person. I know that it would be impossible for me to just sit around and do nothing. I mean, if you could do, housework and taking care of children, nothing, which obviously it's not. But I mean, I'm active enough of a person that I think that I would still keep doing certain extracurricular things on the side. Like I wouldn't give up my music, for example. I sing in a choir. I'd love to keep doing that. So things like that, I would love to keep doing. But I think that I don't know. I kind of would just like play it by ear, see what happens, treat it as it comes.
Yeah.
But one thing the thing I would most look forward to is just all the fun stuff that you get to do as families. Like, I'm really outdoorsy. I really love hiking and just sort of being out in nature and camping and stuff. And I would just love to be able to like take my family on it, go with my family on like a big camping hiking trip, and like that just to me just seems like so much fun, and just sharing the joys of things in life that I really, really enjoy, and things that are just a lot more fun when there's a bunch of kids running around and they're your kids and it's all just a good time for everyone. That's what I'm really looking forward to. Like, if I'm blessed enough to get married.
I believe you will.
Thank you, Ruth. I hope so.
Giving that to you right now, sister.
Time will tell.
Take it.
We didn't even get to talk about feminism. Oh my goodness. I guess we kind of touched on it, but yeah.
Oh, maybe we can do
as you could probably tell, I could talk about this forever.
Yeah, look, there is definitely a lot to say. So, like, I guess what we could finish on is, say there's other girls out there listening to you talking about your experience that resonate with you. Um, what's one final piece of encouragement or advice that you'd want to leave them with?
Don't lose hope. Whatever you do, that's really important. I have lost hope on a couple of occasions, and it's been pretty awful. And I think at the end of the day, the most important thing I think for Christian women is you need to constantly develop and work on your personal relationship with Christ. If you don't have a personal, and I don't mean, and particularly for Catholics, that means not just saying your rosary or going to mass on Sundays. You actually need to have, you need to actually make time to speak to Christ, to speak to God from the heart, and to actually develop that personal connection. Because if you don't have that, you are going to get lost, and it's going to be very easy to be swayed by this or that man or this or that situation. So work on your personal relationship with our Lord, and try to take your hands off the steering wheel and let him do the driving in your life. It's going to be really, really hard if you're like me, but that's the most important thing that you can be doing.
Wow. Thank you, Anna. That's really good advice. So, okay, well, we might wrap it up there. So thank you so much for joining us on Roots Home Truth.
Thank you so much for having me.
So fun. And do you have a title for your book yet?
Yes, but I don't want to reveal it just
Not
yet.
to be revealed yet. Well, when it comes out, we'll have to do this again.
Yes, that'd be great.
Can't wait to read it. It's going to be great.
Thank you. I can't wait for it to be available to read. I got to finish writing it first. But now it'll be good. I'm excited about it.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.